This is Hollisa Alewine. I welcome you back to 50,000 Degrees and Cloudy, A Better Resurrection. We've been unpacking a lot of Torah seeds and seeing how they've basically blossomed into the understanding of the resurrection that's passed on to us in the New Testament, in the Brit Hadashah. So I want to back up again to day 5 of creation as one of those resurrection days. If you'll remember, we have day 3, which is a resurrection day, but chiastically, it's also joined to day 5 as a resurrection day. And this is the day of the creation of the birds and the fish. So on day 5, in this first mention, in terms of seed prophecy, we saw that Elohim creates these feather-covered birds and the scale-covered fish. It's their coverings sometimes that, say in the case of fish, determines whether they're going to meet a kosher requirement or not. A kosher fish has to have fins and scales. It has to have a certain type of covering. So there's all sorts of hints to unpack in those coverings of the birds and the fish. But again, they were referred to as swarms. That root word there, rots, meaning rapidly moving feet, large numbers of little feet moving rapidly. And we know that these birds, again, is one of our symbols of resurrection on the 5th day. They flew above the earth, but you never see a bird fly higher than the bird can breathe. The fish, on the other hand, are hidden, which, again, that connects us back to our symbol of the Feast of Trumpets as being a hidden day, or the day and the hour that no man knows. But it's the birds. Let's take a look at these birds now. We've got great numbers of birds. They are covered. They have coverings. And of course, the coverings are the feathers. But again, the feathers can be symbolic. And we know that on the fish side of things, we have things that are hidden away, but they're there to be fished out. They're there to be revealed at the proper time. But none of these things are that far away from us in terms of either being concealed or how high they fly. They're still very much a part of our natural processes. Likewise, when the righteous dead and living, if they happen to still be alive when Yeshua returns, they will be gathered in these great numbers, such as describe the birds and the fish. There will be swarms. There will be great numbers of people who are gathered into the clouds on this hidden day and then concealed. We can go back to Egypt and see a little bit of this pattern to get the language. Remember, it's coming out of Egypt that they enter into clouds of glory. So if we go to Deuteronomy 32, verse 10, it says, "For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of a wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He guarded him as the pupil of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young, he spread his wings and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. The Lord alone guided him, and there was no foreign god with him. He made him ride on the high places of the earth." So this riding high is a key component of this prophecy of birds and fish on the 5th day. Remember, this Feast of Trumpets is referred to as a day of remembrance. In other words, in order to understand the Feast of Trumpets and resurrection, then you have to look at something that happened in the past, a deliverance of the past. Because if you can't remember this deliverance of the past, then you're going to have difficulty understanding a future one that is based on that prophecy and pattern. And in our case, specifically the resurrection of the dead. So every year, at the appointed time, the Israelites would be reminded of this redemption from Egypt, and how they were basically riding on the heights of the earth, on the wings of an eagle. And it's going to be associated with this commandment. Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. So it says it's a reminder, it's a feast of remembrance. And to this day, in the Jewish tradition, it's seen as a feast of remembrance. It's a day of remembering, especially generations who have gone before you, the righteous who have gone before you, who, a couple of times in Scripture, things will be addressed to those who are standing here and those who aren't standing here. Or it will say, this is an ordinance for all generations. In other words, in this moment, all generations are being collected together. There's a common identity. There's a common community. And so, of all days, the Feast of Trumpets is very much a day of community, because in 10 days at Yom Kippur, you're either in Israel or you're out. It's a national day of repentance. But these are rehearsals. These feasts are rehearsals. They're practicing for a prophetic event so that we won't be caught unaware. And that's what we see in Paul's explanation to the Thessalonians. He realizes there's things they might not know because they weren't brought up in synagogue, but then there's things they should know, because if they've been there long enough, they should know about the feast days. And so he tells them the Lord himself is going to descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with a trumpet. But it's the saints who are being caught up. So Adonai is descending in some way, and the people are going up in some way. Our question is, where is up? Because again, if we've never learned to put these passages together, then we might think we're going into outer space with Yeshua. But that's not the case. We're given all kinds of clues as to how high we would actually fly. In one case, he's telling us no higher than an eagle would fly. That's the heights of the earth, which there might be some prophecy in there too we could unpack. But at any rate, in the natural realm, he's comparing it to the height of an eagle. And if we look at that Greek word that Paul is using, where he says we'll be caught up in the air, it's Strong's number 109. And that word means to breathe unconsciously, to respire, by analogy, to blow. And it says the air, particularly the lower and denser air, as distinguished from the higher and rarer air. In other words, where we are caught up to in the air is a place you can breathe without any special equipment, no higher than the height that a dove would fly, or an eagle. And Mark 1:10, in the Jewish tradition, there's this idea that the Garden of Eden is no higher, that level of heaven is no higher than the height a dove would fly. Well, we have the example of the eagle, but in Mark 1:10, we get some additional information that seems to go with that rabbinic expectation of the heavens, this third heaven, being no higher than the height of a dove. Because in Mark 1:10 it says, immediately coming out of the water, he saw the heavens opening. Notice they open. Opening. Right? It doesn't say from outer space, it says he just saw the heavens opening, like opening a door. And the Spirit, like a dove, descending upon him. Right? It doesn't say the Spirit is a dove, but it says its mannerism, its characteristic is like a dove descending. Now, how high will a dove fly? If we can conceive that, then we get a better idea of where that opening is in the heavens. For instance, like Jacob seeing a ladder and the angels ascending and descending. Well, it doesn't say the ladder went to outer space. Apparently, Jacob can actually see the opening where these angels are coming in and out. Luke 9:35 says, "And there came a voice out of the cloud saying, 'This is my beloved Son, hear him.'" All right? This is a pretty low-lying cloud. All right? If we think of the height of a bird, the height of this cloud right over Yeshua, or in some cases enveloping Yeshua at the Mount of Transfiguration, that gives us an idea of, even though it's hard in the natural realm to think about something that is concealed in a spiritual realm, we have to start seeing with our spiritual eyes and realize that the Father's way of describing to us the height is comparing it to the height of a bird when it's flying, or the height of a cloud, especially as it pertains to the Israelites in the wilderness. And if you'll notice, in the covenant between the pieces that was made with Abraham, there was one particular animal that was left undivided, and that was the dove. It says in Genesis 15:17, "It came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces." But remember, the dove was undivided. The others were animals that have been halved. Remember our example of the chiasm? They just lay them over, and they're mirror images. Each side is a mirror image of the other. You put them back together, and they make a whole. So this could represent, if you've read the blessings given to Abraham and the blessings given to Sarah, they're almost identical. You could look at that covenant between the pieces and say, wow, almost verbatim, the same language in the promises given to both of them. And you make the parallel that Adam was put into a deep sleep before he was separated into two, a male and a female. And here we have Abraham being put into a deep sleep, but we've got a covenant between the pieces. So they were two, yet they were one. It's a picture there again of unity. Even though there's two sides in this chiasm, it's one entity. And what could that mean? Well, it probably has lots of meanings, but it can represent, again, that righteous woman, Israel. You know, in Revelation, we have a mother of abominations who's committing whoredom with the kings of the earth. But the promise to Sarah, the princess, is what her name means, is that she would be a mother of many nations, and that blessings would be attached to that. So they're complete opposites. We have here a woman, Israel, in Revelation, who has the characteristics of her mother Sarah. But that little dove was undivided, and it helps us kind of decode what's going on there with those divided pieces. But the burning torch shows up when the sun sets. And we know this offering is taking place long before there's a tabernacle, long before there's a temple. But it's still a prophecy. Again, there's another type of offering where it's undivided, and that's the Olah offering. And it's often translated whole burnt offering. If your translation says whole burnt offering, it's kind of getting it, but not completely, because it does remain whole, undivided. But the most important thing to know about it is its name, which is Olah. And Olah means like Allah, you go up, or Aliyah, immigrating to Israel. So it's a going up, it's a rapture-themed offering. Isaac was an Olah offering. He was a resurrection offering because Abraham believed he could be even resurrected from the dead. But nothing stopped the evening and the morning Olah offerings. So we've got this evening torch. It's burning, it's purifying the ashes of the evening sacrifice. If we look at the tabernacle, if we look at the temple. And it can give us a picture of two resurrections, because you've got an Olah offering morning and evening, and they never stop, no matter what. We get the idea that through Yeshua, he will always be the resurrection and the life. Once he resurrects you to life, then it's eternal. It never stops. It's an eternal transformation. So we've got two of them. We've got a first resurrection, and then we also have a second resurrection. But as we look at it this way, there's going to be ashes of the previous resurrection offering that are still going to be present on the altar at the next, and it's going to be uninterrupted. Because remember, ashes represent death. And so you have this uninterrupted prophecy because of the timing of the Olah offerings, this undivided offering of Abraham's descendants. Remember Abraham saying, I'm dust and ashes? His descendants going up at all times, perpetually. You have the pieces that mirror the others, something divided, but yet still part of one single being, like the dove, which has that characteristic or representation of the Holy Spirit. The same resurrection fire passes through them both, whether we're talking about the dove or the divided offerings. So you've got a couple of different ways, looking at those offerings, of thinking about the resurrection. But this burning torch, what was that that's passing between the pieces? Isaiah 62:1 says, For Zion's sake I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not keep quiet, until her righteousness goes forth like brightness, and her salvation like a torch that is burning. So again, we see salvation. That burning torch was salvation. It was a picture of Yeshua. Again, everything, we're looking at the sacrifices, just looking at the stories of the Torah, they're not just stories, they're prophecies. And we can see Yeshua as that burning torch. Now, at Sinai, we also had a burning torch. We had thunder, we had lightning. We had all sorts of fire on the mountain. But it says down here in Jeremiah 31:32, because it's talking about a new covenant. That's the important thing. That the old covenant, the people broke it. So he says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband unto them. That really makes you think about that covenant between the pieces and the promises made to Abraham and Sarah and the unity that they had, and then the salvation passing through the pieces with the burning torch. Because we know that Yeshua came to mediate a better covenant and a better resurrection. He began by rebuilding the unity between the husband, Adonai, and the wife, Israel. The word itself never changed. Israel is changing. The people's hearts are changing. That's evidence of the new covenant. And so we see Yeshua, who appears sometimes in a cloud. If we look back in this paleo prophecy of the covenant between the pieces, he's basically appearing in a garment of smoke and a garment of fire. And that helps us to kind of see what's going on with the cloud in the Torah prophecies, where sometimes it's a cloud by day, but it's a fire by night. There's both aspects of that. So he's like that hidden husband. You know, he's the one that we're coming into unity with. Through his salvation, he has mediated a better covenant, a better resurrection. So let's look at 2 Samuel 5:24, going back to how high are these heavens? Because when we see the Spirit descending upon Yeshua, again, it doesn't seem to be any higher than a dove would fly. So it says, "It shall be, when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then you shall act promptly, for the Lord will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines." Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a balsam tree, but they're closer to shrub than tree. They're not very high at all. So if you can think, okay, the armies of God are walking in the tops of the balsam trees, again, we're not any higher than the height a dove would fly. We're well within that range. We're no higher than the height of a tree. There's another place. It says, "It shall be when you hear the sound of marching." Remember the rapidly moving feet of the fifth day? It has to do with feet. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then you shall go out to battle, for God will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines. That's 1 Chronicles 14:15. So that's two places there where we are told that the armies of God are marching in the tops of the balsam trees. Now, there's lots of stuff that can be concealed in that statement. Not just the sound of the rapidly moving feet of resurrection. The balsam trees actually have context. So if we go back to the Song of Songs, which would be chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh along with my balsam." There's the balsam again. So what do we know about the balsam? Well, obviously it was a very expensive fragrance. I've seen the balsam shrub. You can take the leaf and rub it and smell, and that has one odor, which is, it's pleasant. It's kind of a citrusy, almost a cypressy smell. You can take the berry and crush the berry, and you smell that, and it's like, well, it's not exactly the same smell. It's not unpleasant. It's kind of nice, not very strong. But if you'll take a knife and you'll score in the bark, or scrape away a little bit of the bark of a balsam tree, and then catch some of the liquid, you have to give it a minute to let it start kind of flowing out. You catch that liquid and smell it, and it's wonderful. It's the most beautiful thing. And like I say, those trees are not very high. So the armies of Adonai are located somewhere in the tops of the balsam trees. The balsam tree is associated with the Garden of Eden. And this is where we go back to the Jewish tradition concerning that lower, what we call it the lower garden or the Garden of Eden, because obviously there's going to be an upper garden where the water is flowing down into the lower garden to give it drink. Jewish legend has it that there's, of the 4 rivers that we looked at when we looked at Genesis 2 and the rivers that were flowing, they say of these 4 rivers, one flows with milk, one flows with honey, one flows with wine, and then one flows with balsam. So now we understand why he would say the armies of God are marching in the tops of the balsam trees. Although we don't want to attribute space or time to the garden, the best we can understand it in our human terms is that the Garden of Eden would have been about treetop height. And you would have been able to hear the armies of God, given spiritual ears, marching up there. Why balsam? Because it reminds you of the Garden of Eden and one of the rivers of the Garden of Eden. So again, this message is you're going to be victorious because in the garden, the armies of God are marching with you. And of course, the balsam, it's going to come from a living tree, but you actually have to wound that tree in order to extract those beautiful scents that you can make out of it, whether you're going to make an oil or you're going to compound an incense. But think of Yeshua on the cross. His job is to gather the righteous dead at some point, and we will see this first fruit glimpse of it when the saints of old are seen walking around the streets of Jerusalem. But Yeshua there hanging on the cross, and what is called paradise is this lower garden, or the Garden of Eden. He's having a conversation with the thief on one side of him. Some translations might say like a zealot, somebody who was stirring up trouble. And he assures this thief that this day you will be with me in paradise, which is the lower garden, the Garden of Eden. And at least in David's mind, the height of the Garden of Eden is about treetop level. That's where heaven's armies are, of an earthly balsam tree. So how high is heaven's army? How high will the saints ascend? Yeshua seems to be telling the thief that the garden's not that far away. Because remember how many times he taught the kingdom of heaven, it's upon you. It's very close. It's as close as a treetop, as close as a dove or an eagle. But it's a spiritual realm, and it's hidden to physical eyes. So we have to look at examples like, say, Elisha in 2 Kings 6:17, that he prays because his servant is concerned that they're surrounded by the enemy. And Elisha is not worried at all because he can see something that his servant cannot see. So it says, Elisha prayed, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. Now that's kind of strange wording. First of all, Elisha, the prophet, can see something that his servant can't. He can see the armies of God, just like David knew that the armies of God were marching in the treetops. And so he says, okay, open this kid's eyes so he can understand what's going on here. Where he's seeing the enemies in the physical realm, he's got to be able to see the true army marching in the spiritual realm. And it says the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire. The mountain was. That's odd. A mountain full of an army? But then it says it's surrounding Elisha. But when we put that back again into the context of our circular garden and the rivers of Eden, then we can see how those armies of God, or the chariots of fire and so forth, would have been something you would expect to see. Because those fiery rivers of Eden, the whole definition of a river in Hebrew is something that's burning and shining. So what Elisha saw was basically this protection in the spiritual realm that you would associate with the lower garden, with the Garden of Eden. But it's concealed to the eyesight in the physical realm. So you say, well, can I just want to and see the garden? I doubt it, but you could certainly pray and say, Father, give me a glimpse of your garden. Let me feel your presence right where I am today.